A smaller than normal crowd, still a pretty big crowd by NFL standards, 18-plus thousand at Lincoln Financial Field. They followed that up today back at NovaCare Center. Tomorrow they're off back on Wednesday with all the latest on the Eagles at the NovaCare Center. Is 97.3 ESPN.com's Eagles insider John McMullen, who joins us with a look at the Birds on the first week now in the books at NovaCare Center. And there's a lot of interesting storylines up there. Give us a little indication on yesterday and the buzz or lack thereof. What stood out about a much smaller crowd than normal at Lincoln Financial Field, John?
Yeah, there's a couple caveats to that, I think. It was 18,000 about, as you mentioned. Probably could have fit across the street in Wells Fargo Center if they wanted to do in there. That's versus 43,000 last year. So I think people jump to conclusions and say there's no interest in their team and this team, and I think it is a little down, but there were some contributing factors. It was very rainy in the morning. The practice itself was early as opposed to being in the afternoon. So you got to enter all that into the mix. And the people that were there were very, very excited, mainly for, obviously, Carson Wentz. And it's interesting, as I wrote, it's very, very rare where the face of the franchise is the third-string quarterback. But that's exactly what's going on in Philadelphia. The face of the franchise is the third-string quarterback.
Well, it was Tim Tebow a year ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, good point. Fourth string. Not like this. No. The Eagles fans realize that this is the guy, and this is going to be the guy for the next decade. Problem is they got to get there. And I think a lot of them want to go into slumber and sort of pay attention to the Sixers come November and hope to get to next year as quickly as possible. But
how was Bradford received?
You know, it wasn't bad. It wasn't nearly as bad, but again, maybe the crowd wasn't, it certainly wasn't as large as normal. I think people were focused on Carson, so I think Sam kind of flew under the radar a little bit, and it got a tepid reaction, not all that good, not all that bad, and I think that's because they see him as what he is, and that's a lame duck. So Carson, the We Want Wentz chants were out. The Carson chants were out. And that was clearly the main storyline of the fan base that was there.
So here, Carson Wentz comes out. He gets some cheers, tepid reaction towards Sam Bradford. What about on the field? Did Bradford, give the fans any reason to cheer or want to go towards Carson Wentz?
No, I thought he had one of his sort of uneven days. It wasn't bad. He got better as the practice went on. He had a really bad throw early, and then sort of settled down from there and was solid. But a lot of the things we've heard about Sam come to fruition. He's too quick to check things down, and there could be a number of reasons for that. Obviously, this offensive line wasn't very good last year, so he's got that in his head. The wide receiver group isn't very good, so a lot of times you do have to check down to Zach Ertz or Darren Sproles because those are your top skill position options. So the thing about Sam is he's not exciting to this fan base, and that's it's not about winning football games. He's capable of winning football games, but when you talk about the juice or lack thereof regarding this team, it's because Sam's not that exciting at this point in his career.
John, what is exciting up there? What stands out so far? Where are some of the areas that have been something to keep an eye on, something to watch?
Well, good question. That's, we kind of talked about it. There really is no identity to this team yet, and I think it's still developing. It's still morphing. A lot of people think it's going to be the defense and think it's going to be the front four and the aggressiveness of Jim Schwartz, but until we see it, we don't know that. The one guy who stood out to me above all else, and it's amazing because he's 33 years old and he's just got a one-year extension, and people were talking about him moving on in the off season or possibly being traded, and that's Darren Sproles, who's taken all the first-team reps because Ryan Matthews hasn't been on the practice field. And he's just so amazingly quick at his age. He just stands out on the football field. And it's really, really the one guy you look on this team offensively and say, as an opposing defensive coordinator, during the week when I prepare for the Eagles, the only guy I want to put a jersey on is 43 on the scout team for Darren Sproles, because that's the one guy you can't match up with.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting, because the wide receivers, and that was the first question that was asked of Frank Reich today on his impressions of the wide receivers at camp, and you just mentioned Darren Sproles as still the most exciting guy out there. This wide receiver core didn't really add a whole heck of a lot. I saw MMQB basically suggest that Rueben Randle would be in trouble of even making the 53-man roster. You hear that. Does that mean somebody is standing out there? Because you would think that he would be a guy that would be adding to this wide receiver core, not being in trouble of not making the team.
Yeah, we were actually talking about that, me and a bunch of other writers at camp today, and I don't know what the heck Peter King's looking at, because there is absolutely no chance that Rueben Randle's not going to make this team, with the possible exception of off-the-field matters. In other words, if they don't like him as a human being or something of that nature, maybe that can turn things in different directions. But the most purely talented wide receiver on this team is Rueben Randle. And that's not good, by the way.
Yeah.
And that speaks to the level of desperation they have at that position. And you mentioned Frank talking about it. You know, he's kind of stumbling around trying to come up with names. And the fact that Chris Givens and Nelson Aguilar are your top outside receivers at this point, and they're mixing and matching. But it's pretty clear it's going to be Matthews, Randle, Givens, Huff, and that's going to be the core group. And
so will they keep five?
Yeah, and Mike, because they're going to keep 4 tight ends. Doug pretty much confirmed that yesterday, and they're going to keep 4 running backs. And there just isn't enough talent to keep 6 receivers. He's going to be the 6th guy. T.J. Graham's hurt. He's never been that good when he's on the field. And some of the young guys, Caleb Jones, Hunter Sharp, Xavier Rush, they just drop the football consistently. You know, I've seen NFL practices with great receiving corps. You never see the ball hit the ground. Never. And with this team, you'll see it 2, 3, 4 times every single practice. Somebody's dropping the football. It's just not a good group. And to ascertain...
That's unbelievable, by the way. You know, John, sorry to cut you off, but Barrett was on earlier, said when he was in Philadelphia, they'd go a week or 2 without seeing a drop. I mean, with Irving Fryer, that group, he said, you go a week. And I just saw Pro Football Focus tweet out this morning, 7.8% of the passes last year Sam Bradford threw were dropped. I mean, that's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it really is. I covered Chris Carter in his prime. You wouldn't see it drop past the entire season in practice. Didn't drop the football. And you see it consistently with this group. And it's not one guy. It's top to bottom. And the one guy who stands out as far as hands goes is Rueben Randle. So, Peter came in for one day, and I don't know. He's very plugged in, obviously. But I don't know where he got that assessment, because, if anything, Rueben Randle's kind of proven, talent-wise at least, that he's kind of at the top of this list with Jordan Matthews.
Yeah, and what's Matthews looking like? Because, I mean, I guess even if you said Matthews has cleaned up the drops, he's still a slot guy, right? I mean, and there's only so much explosion you can get from the guy playing in the slot.
Yeah, he made a big play at the length field. He actually got a deep ball with Sam Bradford. He beat Leotis McKelvin and Malcolm Jenkins, and those are the 2 best defensive backs the Eagles have. So that was a little bit exciting. But I think the biggest disappointment about Matthews as a whole is when they started the off-season work Doug had insisted that he was going to play a lot on the outside. And as he got to see him, he sort of changed his mentality and said, no, he's going to be better off in the slot. Now, he's still going to move around because this offense is about formations. And when you compare it to Chip Kelly's, it's basically calculus compared to arithmetic as far as lining up. So all the receivers are going to play multiple positions, and they're going to move inside and out. Jordan, no exception to that. But the majority of the time, he's going to be in the slot because that's where he's most effective.
John, you impressed with Pederson's coaching style?
Yeah, I am. I seem to be one of the only ones. You can't judge him. Obviously,
forget these polls that rank him last. I mean, just in general.
I think it's a better. He goes about things in a better way. He teaches on the field. He's got a lot. I know this will surprise people because one of the big stories over the last week was about him not knowing there were 3 channels in the communication system. So there's certain people trying to paint him as sort of a dullard. But if you watch him on the field and what I just talked about in the formations and things like that, you'll see him correct things. He knows exactly what he wants. He'll move an offensive lineman 5 inches if he's in the wrong spot. So the attention to detail as far as what he wants to accomplish is there. Whether or not that translates and he turns into the second coming of Andy Reid or a top-tier coach, we'll see. But that coupled with the fact that I thought he handled the Bradford situation this offseason pretty well. I think he handled it beautifully. I think all the trends are positive when it comes to Doug Pederson, and I'm one of the few people to believe that, evidently.
Well, I guess some of the reasons is, as you mentioned, the wide receivers. There's only so much the coach can do if you don't have the personnel, and you mentioned the wide receivers. How about at that running back position, where Matthews still not on the field, Wendell Smallwood and Sproles seem to be the 2 guys there. I guess there would be Barner and the other kid from Oregon, battling back there. But it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of depth and reason to be all that excited if Matthews can't. That's the problem with him. You can't ever get excited about Matthews when you can get excited about him when he's on the field, but that's few and far between, it seems like.
Yeah, we're a week in now, and Monday to Monday. And
no sign of him, right?
No sign of him. Still not on the practice field. Last week, Doug said he would be back at some point this week. So maybe Wednesday is a logical day because tomorrow's an off day. And the same for Brandon Brooks for that matter also because he hasn't been on the field. But, it's a concern. We go back a long time talking about Ryan Matthews, very talented guy, but you can't count on him. Now, this will all blow over if he's able to get back on the practice field, and as long as he's ready for week 1, I don't really care if he misses the first week of training camp, but they certainly need him because as much as I gushed about Sproles, you can't give him a heavy workload. If you do, some of that quickness is going to evaporate pretty quickly because if he gets banged up, and remember, he's a 5'6" guy, he's in very good shape, but he's not very big. And if you get banged up and you don't have your legs, all of a sudden your one advantage isn't there. So they need Ryan Matthews.
Hey, Sayamalo at left guard, Wisniewski. How do you see those two in in competition? Is it Sayamalo in battle with Barbary for left guard, Wisniewski in a battle for right guard? And what are the chances that I guess Brooks is your right guard, even though he hasn't been on the field. But so is Wisniewski in the battle for left guard? So how do you kind of handicap what's happening at left guard? Is that the one position that's up for grabs?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's Alan Barber's right now. I mean, one of the issues is Wisniewski has been starting at right guard the entire first week of camp because Brooks is not there. So he's been taking every rep of his on the right side, and it's pretty clear that he's going to be the game day interior backup, the guy who can play, the guy who dresses on Sunday and can play center or either guard spot if you need him to go in the day. That's going to be his role. Isaac, he missed the entire offseason basically, and he's way behind the curve. And I actually got to talk to him after practice at the link the other day, and I thought he was going to jump off the bridge because, he was a little disappointed in the way things have been going because it's tough to get up to speed when you've missed that much time. So I think that really hurt him, the quarter system, that he wasn't able to be here. In their envision of having a competition for left guard hasn't really shown itself because Doug named Alan Barber the starter in the offseason, and he's been the starter, and he's taken every single first-team rep, and nobody else is even close at this point.
Interesting there. John McMullen, 97.3. ESPN.com has plenty on today's practice at the NovaCare Center. They have the day off tomorrow. Let's look at some defensive things here to kind of dive out. Give me your thoughts on Jordan Hicks, because I think he's a key. Can he be the playmaking guy? I mean, when he got entered into that role last year, John, he was a difference maker. And I thought it was an interesting piece. I think Paul Domowitch wrote a piece on Billy Davis. Am I right about that?
Yeah, he wrote Billy. One thing, obviously, Billy doesn't have a job, and we always say that being Chip Kelly's defensive coordinator is probably the worst job in the NFL, and he's kind of feeling the stain of that. His reputation took quite a hit. But the most interesting thing to me in Paul's piece was he wasn't really very kind to Michael Kendricks, and I'm on board with that, but I was surprised that he was so clear and defined about as a guy who just hasn't really gotten the mental part of the game. He's got tremendous physical attributes, but he hasn't gotten the other stuff down. And if you haven't by this point, it's probably not going to happen.
Well,
but as far as Jordan, yeah, I mean, he's really instinctive. He's the exact opposite. I mean, he's got a nose for the football. And some guys have it, some guys don't. And he's got an innate feel to understand what's happening in front of him. So the questions with him all surround on staying on the field because he's had so many issues with that, not only here in his rookie season, but dating back to his days in college. So that's, I think, the only concern with Jordan Hicks.
Yeah, and one of the things in that article that stood out to me was he kind of talked about how the team was playing really well the first 8 to 10 weeks of the year, save for, I guess, a game he mentions them playing Washington and giving up that late drive. But that kind of coincides with when Hicks was out there on the field and making plays and turning the football over. And you wonder, is that a product of the position he was playing 3-4 inside linebacker? Is he going to be able to do that as a 4-3 middle guy?
No, I mean, you're still going to be the quarterback of the defense. I don't think that's going to affect him, and he'll be able to make a ton of plays.
Is this better for him? Is it better for him?
Yeah, I would think it's better. I mean, you're going to be the quarterback of the defense. Everything flows to you. It's designed for you to make tackles and make plays. So as far as that part of it, he's going to have plenty of opportunity. And I understand because Jordan was playing great. He was in the conversation for being a Pro Bowl type player. That's how well he was playing as a rookie. And when he went down, all of a sudden you got to go back to veteran guys who weren't playing well to begin with. And it hurt the Eagles. But I think if you take a step back and look at it from a larger perspective, I can't really put it all on that because when Chip was here, it's just the history of that defense was they would wilt in the second half. And I think it had more to do with being on the field so much, with the sort of the floor dropping out from under them, because they saw so many plays. Pro Football Focus will tell you, when Chip Kelly was the coach here, the Eagles defense played an average of 18 games a year. That's how long they were on the field, more than the average NFL team. Basically, 2 more full games than every other single NFL team. And that's going to wear on you. Every year, Mike, they had the top defender had the most reps, whether it was DeMeco Ryans the one year, Malcolm Jenkins. Every single year, and that wears on guys.
Hey, John, how is, it seems to be a hot topic. You wrote about Eric Rowe. Is, he in, the competition at corner. Barrett was on with us earlier. He thinks the cornerback spot is the most interesting competition there. And you wrote about Eric Rowe yesterday. How has he evolved in this competition, and is that the most intriguing competition for you?
Yeah, it is. I think, as I wrote, at least he stopped digging the hole. Obviously this coaching staff wasn't as high on him as other people in the city, and he really fell back on the depth chart in the offseason. And he came into this camp as this team's fifth corner, and that's pretty astonishing. So the starters are Leotis McKelvin, Nolan Carroll, Ron Brooks in the slot. And then even Jalen Mills, the seventh-round pick, was ahead of Eric Rowe as far as Jim Schwartz and Corey Unlin were concerned. But he's starting to come out of it, and Doug mentioned he needs him to compete. And I talked to somebody who used to play for Schwartz, and he said he likes braggadocious guys who play with swagger. And if you see Leotis McKelvin, that describes him to a T. I mean, he's just got all the confidence in the world, and he believes in himself, and he believes he's always going to make a play. And even Ron Brooks, the other guy who was basically, most people thought he was brought in to be a special teams guy. He carries himself sort of that same way, and Jim likes that. And Eric's an understated guy. He's very quiet, doesn't talk a lot, and I think that sort of turned them the wrong way, and he's starting to change. He's had 2 interceptions this week. He got some first-team reps when Brooks dropped out with cramps and Nolan Carroll dropped out with some soreness in his leg. So he's starting to get back on the radar. He's not there yet. He's going to make this football team. There's some people who speculated he'd get cut. That's not going to happen. He's going to make this football team. The question is, can he get back in the conversation to be an actual meaningful contributor on game day?
All right, John. Obviously, this team's got a ways to go before even their first, preseason game. But one of the more exciting things is to hear is that Brian Dawkins is back. Many people have wondered over the years whether he would be a coach, a head coach, a defensive coordinator, something. Maybe not as a coach, but he's back in the scouting department here, and I guess that was well received.
Yeah, I mean, obviously. I think besides Carson Wentz, he might have got the biggest ovation yesterday at Lincoln Financial Field. You're talking about one of the most popular players in the history of the franchise, so people are excited that he's back. And I think I compare it to Mike Schmidt with the Phillies because Mike always wanted to get involved at some level in coaching. He even wanted to be the manager, but he didn't want to do the heavy lifting to get there because he was a superstar player. And that's kind of the same thing with Dawkins. Fans might want him to be the defensive backs coach, but it's not that easy. You can't just walk off the field and turn into a coach. Deuce Staley has done it as a very popular, but he puts in the work, and Brian has now made it clear that he wants to put in the work. He wants to get into the football operation side of the business, and this is his first step into it as being a scout for the Eagles.
All right, John has more on the Eagles over at JF McMullen at 97.3 ESPN.com, and we'll have more from John tomorrow as the Eagles have the day off, but there's a lot of Eagles news and obviously some national stuff. You can check out his national NFL coverage over at todayspigskin.com. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, Mike.